Is history repeating itself? Students recently take to the streets to protest with the March for Our Lives movement, and it brings us to the debate, school rules versus the First Amendment. And how about that continued fight? And I'm talking about the one between business owners and their right to withhold service in the name of religion, and customers who want them to sell them something whether they like it or not. We've heard about the baker who refuses custom work for an LGBT couple, but where do the rights of the businesses end and the rights of the consumer begin? St. Louis and surrounding counties are facing a legal battle over whether law enforcement is breaking the constitutional rights of its citizens. We're going to talk about this and a lot more on Across the Aisle. Hello and thank you for joining us for another edition of Across the Aisle. I'm Mike Ferguson, so let's meet our panel of political pundits for the week. He is one of the voices of FM NewsTalk 97.1, Chris Arps, the coolest voice. Don't tell Jamie Ellman I said that. And with us again is the head of the Lindenwood University Collegiate Democrats, Jessie Basler, ice hockey sports superstar, get his autograph now, and president of the Lindenwood University College Republicans, Skyler Budman, and he is the fearless leader of the Missouri Policy Journal, Dr. Joe Cernik. During the National Walkout Day, schools have dealt out punishments for participating, while others, they've worked with the students for the demonstrations, and some have even encouraged it. So where is the line drawn for minors and the protection of their First Amendment rights? We're going to talk about that in about 20 minutes. But let's start with the actions of the St. Louis County Police that has found itself in some hot water in the federal court system. A lawsuit's been filed against Police Chief John Belmar. Now, the lawsuit claims that the person who was arrested was issued a wanted. That's just what it's called, a wanted. And they say they had their Fourth Amendment rights violated. Now, a wanted, in case you were wondering, is permitted right now for police officers to issue what's basically the equivalent of a statewide arrest warrant into an electronic database designating an individual for immediate arrest for up to 24 hours at a time without ever seeking a judicial determination of probable cause. System's been under investigation before. Will this lead to changes? Dr. Cernik, I'm going to start with you. Sounds an awful lot like circumventing the court system and not getting a warrant the right way. Is there a case to be made for, we need to find somebody right now, we don't have time, public safety is at risk?
The legal brief that was filed on the man's behalf cites the 4th, 5th, and 14th Amendments. I think this is the sort of case that has the potential to work itself actually to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the reason was the 5th Amendment, because what they're saying here is the way he was held, he doesn't have 5th Amendment rights to remain silent. And so I think this has the potential. I thought it was interesting, by the way, in the legal brief that his lawyer filed, the lawyer states that he had an expired driver's license and the police officer saw it, but that wasn't the reason that they subsequently took him. Now, this is something that actually has been around since the early 1960s in Missouri, and so it isn't something that's brand new, because even in that legal brief, they're citing law review articles from the early 60s that were trying to address it at that time. So looking at sort of this long-term potential, this is the thing that continues to just fester.
You know, I agree with Dr. Cernik. I think this is a case that probably is going to end up in the Supreme Court. It looks like what you have is law enforcement kind of circumventing the process to be able to basically grab people or pull people off the street. And what you see probably in many of these cases, and I don't know firsthand, is that there are probably minorities or people that don't have means, that don't have an attorney to be able to fight something like this. You know, one of the silver linings, if there were any, in the Michael Brown case was it exposed this whole debtor prison type of thing based on what type of money you made or your wealth. And I think this kind of is the same kind of thing, that this is probably ensnaring probably poor people. Now,
police need to talk to somebody that they're involved in a crime, but they don't have enough for a warrant. Why can't they have something, Jessie, that says, I need to go get that person and talk to them?
I think it circumvents the whole system. The reason why we have that judicial intervention is to make everything fair, and that way you take the step of it from being harassment. And I can understand in a high-intensity case where the police officer think there's initial harm or inherent danger to someone that they want to take that step into it, but it's fairly easy to get an electronic warrant sent back, signed by a judge, and get it back within a reasonable time. I think it's just an issue of they want bail money, they want damages and things like that, and they just want to pull people in on their own regard without consideration of people's rights.
Police all over the country, especially in the St. Louis area, don't need any more bad PR and reasons to have conflict with people, but are we risking a bad balance between police, public relations, and public safety?
I think the way that the system is being implemented is an issue because we are circumventing the judicial system. However, I think there is something to be said about this communication system amongst police officers to be able to talk about people who may be a potential to do some sort of danger to society. So I can understand the dangers that come along with this system, but I also think a system of this sort where we have communications between multiple jurisdictions is something that is good to implement.
Yeah, but if you think they potentially could do something, I mean, everybody could potentially do something.
Right. And I think it's not necessarily looking at somebody as a potential threat, but more so when we see somebody who could be flagged, maybe they're making, they've been making purchases that we should look into, and we should have somebody from the judicial system assess this case or somebody look further into it in order to determine if this person is in fact a danger. We add this additional check from the judicial system so that police enforcement can do their job better than they are now.
Okay, kind of jump ball here. If police, not just in the St. Louis area, around the state, around the country, if they have been using a warrant from a judge, would we even be having a controversy here?
I don't think so.
So what's the motivation?
This, I think, is, again, that Fifth Amendment issue that you're telling somebody, we're not holding you, you don't have the right of silence under the Fifth Amendment. And I think that's the issue that's really going to make it to the federal court system. And my guess is because Ferguson is referred to in there and the approximately 200-page Ferguson ruling is referred to in there, I think this has the potential to carry this case onward.
And what's going to be really glaring when they look at all these cases, that the people are probably going to be poor and they're probably going to be minorities, and that's going to be glaring.
So do we have a situation where we could have rare bipartisan agreement?
I think we actually do.
I was just about to say that. Did we all agree here?
Yeah, but that's the thing is there's a right way to do it. It's been around for 100+ years, and for whatever reason, now we've got a system of police saying, no, we don't want to go through that. I don't know if it's a probable cause standard, but we just want to be able to question somebody and make them be questioned.
If the case moves on, you're probably going to have what they call a discovery notice. And as a result, they'll be trying to get the records from the sheriff's and police department and to see if they've even addressed anything since the Ferguson ruling. And if they haven't, that actually opens the door to federal action.
And this probably was something where it was probably based on terrorism, where there was some type of immediate threat. So you want to go and pick somebody up to try to alleviate, a bombing or some type of terrorist activity. And it looks like law enforcement has kind of exploited it and just want to go get
Well, and they used to have the
average Joe.
exclusionary rule. And that allowed you to get somebody in a situation where you didn't have a warrant. And so the exclusionary rule allowed you to act outside the parameters of a legal process. So this sort of seems like it's almost replaced that.
So if it's been around since the 60s, for whatever it's worth, I blame the hippies. All their fault. Well, students talk the talk and then they walk the walkout. But can schools dictate whether or not they have a voice on controversial issues such as gun control on school time in the wake of February's mass killing? We'll talk about that in less than 10 minutes. And just ahead, the popular saying goes, the customer's always right. But is that something we should be taking literally? The panel weighs in on the future of businesses and their right to refuse service as customers fight on charges of discrimination. It's all right here on Across the Aisle.
We'd do anything for kids. Yet 1 in 6 children in the U.S. struggle with hunger. Help end childhood hunger near you Learn how at feedingamerica.org.
I'm a retired school psychologist, and helping people was my thing. After my stroke, when Meals on Wheels started, I was on the other end of the stick, so to speak. And I appreciated it very much, the attention that was given. My name is Julius Gaines, creative writer, poet, photographer. America, let's do lunch.
Drop off a hot meal and say hello. Volunteer by donating your lunch break at americaletsdolunch.org.
Everybody says they want freedom of choice, right? But who has the most freedom when businesses and consumers do battle? I'm Mike Ferguson. Thank you for watching Across the Aisle. In the federal case of Masterpiece Cake Shop Limited versus the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, business owner Jack Phillips is facing a battle that's kind of been marinating in the courts for years. Now here's the question. Where is that line drawn for religious freedoms when it comes to matters of business? And Chris, this is the case where the gay couple comes in and says, we want a wedding cake. He says, you know what? I religiously don't believe in that. You can buy your cake somewhere else. And he is potentially going to be fined hundreds of thousands of dollars, could potentially face jail time for it. At some point, do we give up some of our rights of conscience when we go into the marketplace?
No, I don't think you ever give up your right of conscience. And I think what this case ultimately shows is the homosexual lobby or that movement, that this is really about destroying the institution of marriage, because there are plenty of different bakeries that are around the state or around the country or in that region that will make a cake for you. But I don't understand why you have to make an example out of a particular bakery because of their religious convictions or their conscience, have to put them out of business when you have so many different options. I know that many will try to equate this to me being an African American and being discriminated against, but I don't believe it's the same thing. One, I can always go to some other place that wants my business. And the argument that you know, African Americans, I can't hide who I am as a person. People know that I'm black, but the homosexual lobby, they're the one that puts it out in public and lets people know all that and makes it an issue.
Now, here's the interesting point, though.
This is going to be a case where it's going to go against the baker, and I think the precedent is going to be cited as Bob Jones University versus United States in 1983. The university tried to use the First Amendment as a way of discriminating against African American citizens going to their school. Then they allowed African American couples, but then they stated nobody who's interracial was allowed to come. And I think what's going to end up happening is, when I was reading the various statements by members of the Supreme Court, they were realizing, well, wait a minute, why doesn't the hairdresser have a right to be an artist? Because he's saying he was an artist, and that this sort of nuance, I think, is just too much.
But the one thing, though, is homosexuals are not a protected class in the Constitution. You can fire someone legally because they're homosexual. You can't do that if someone is black. So there's no protected class for them in the Constitution to be able to protect that.
Quick side note, they weren't banning people who were biracial. They had a ban against people who were dating interracially or married interracially.
Well, you couldn't come even if you believed, and I even went back and took a look at the quotes that they had, and that he said, we deny applicants engaged in interracial marriage or known to advocate interracial marriage. So it was a broad statement. Subsequently, by the way, the president of Bob Jones had to renounce back in 2009 the position, saying our religious position at that time was wrong. So the assumption here that somehow you have religious freedom, even using this, sort of opens it up as sort of an evolutionary way of looking at how you see something from a religious perspective.
Let me go back to one of the points that Chris just made, Jesse, in that you've got a free market. If I don't want to sell you a cake, you can punish me immediately by buying a cake from somebody else and telling all your friends to not do business with me. Why do we want government forcing me to sell you something if I don't want to take your money?
See, I can see the theory that everyone's like, shop somewhere else. I looked up his cakes. They're not that great anyway. The issue behind it is it's not about the cake. It's about discrimination. The fact is that, yes, you can't hide your color, and gay people can, but they shouldn't have to. It's oppression to them. That's who they are. They should be openly free to express who they are and things like that. The issue is that they have these non-discrimination laws in these local areas because it's against sex, gender, and housing and employment. It's because in all these areas, people are discriminated for. There's the don't ask, don't tell, just hide who you are, keep it out of my face. People should not have to hide their identities just to make other people comfortable.
So someone is being oppressed because you don't want to sell them a cake.
It links, it's not just about the cake, it's about the discrimination laws.
But that's what you
it's a
just
bigger
said.
issue.
You said they're oppressed because someone doesn't
The
want to sell
oppression
them a
comes
cake.
from exactly what you said, that they can hide it. They shouldn't have to hide it. It's an oppression issue.
Yeah,
because
I think it's important to add in the fact that this really showcases the beauty of the free market. Because what we have here is a very clear-cut example of somebody doing something. It's publicized. Anybody who wants to talk about it can. And to be frank, I actually don't have a problem with a store owner making any sort of decision. Because at the end of the day, they are governed by the people. If nobody brings their business to a cake owner because the cake owner openly doesn't support gay marriage, he will go under. And this is a perfect example for any case. I mean, for me, I'm Jewish, and if a store owner wasn't interested in serving Jewish people, I wouldn't go there. And in addition to that, I'd imagine most of you also wouldn't feel comfortable going.
I don't think this is about one thing. It's about opening up a wedge and then swinging the door wide open that allows mass rationalizations to say we have a right to not do anything with people who are gay.
But this is based on this is based on someone's Judeo-Christian, whatever religious beliefs that they have, that they don't want to look like they're sanctioning a homosexual marriage. But that's different. You can't say that I am discriminated against because it's my religion. That's what's found unconstitutional. This is different when you're saying this is something of conscience. And I'm not placing it on my religion of I don't believe in homosexuality, but it has nothing to do with race. And it goes back to again what I'm saying, homosexuals are not a protected class in this country.
Well, why shouldn't they be?
Well, that's a whole different subject. But currently what we're discussing right now, they're not.
Now, when it comes to again, you got the free market argument, but governments have very strict anti-discrimination rules. I don't know that anybody disagrees with those. We're talking about the private sector and somebody's private property. Should that make a difference?
So in that private sector, are they receiving benefits from the state, local governments, or the federal government in any case? Then why should they keep their baby? If they're getting like tax cuts and things for specific services they find and they receive any kind of funding whatsoever, I think they should null those rights that they have against people if they're discriminating and going against the local discrimination laws.
Well, the government can be in the heavy hand of everybody's life because everybody gets some type of something from the government, some type of subsidy. So if they don't like what I'm doing, they can take my subsidy away, or they can punish me because they don't like my subsidy.
Well, I think that we're overlooking the fact that if a business is doing something that we don't like, we simply don't have to take our business there. And I don't understand why that's being overlooked.
I think it's not that narrow. I think the issue is a precedent where if he's allowed to do this, you open up the door to many businesses, many types of organizations saying, we have a right to not service.
And that seems like an opportunity for another organization to profit off of people making the decision
not to serve
certain people. But
it's not about profits, it's about respect. It can go back to the civil rights era where we could have taken our business elsewhere because they don't
Respect is an arbitrary term. I think it's about somebody making a decision that they feel comfortable with.
And there have been cases where people have tried to discriminate on race, religion, other things, and it's been upheld.
Okay, so in the last 30 seconds or so here, I'll go around the table. Do you have a constitutional right, yes or no question, to be a jerk in your business?
No, this one here, he's going to lose.
No, he's going to lose.
100%, it's up to you.
Up to you.
There we go. Not a surprise. A divided panel on this one. All right, coming up, the March for Our Lives movement. Now, even minors, well, they've got First Amendment rights, but how far can schools go with that right in order to keep students in class? Now, you know our panelized opinions on that. Stay with us right here on Across the Aisle.
It takes less than 1 minute to find out if you may have prediabetes. You can do it here. But you probably won't. You're busy. Kids, work, show coming back in 48 seconds. So let's do this now. Hold up one finger if you're a man, women, 0. 3 more fingers if you're over 60, 2 over 50, 1 over 40. If you're not sure, keep in mind you're sitting on a couch right now, so 1 more finger if you're not very active. 1 finger if yes, 0 if no. 1 yes, 0 no. Next, find the body type that looks most like you and hold up that many fingers while I look around awkwardly. And that's it. If you're holding up 5 fingers or more, you probably have prediabetes. Sorry to be so blunt, but hey, you're busy. Just go to the site.
Over the past year or so, we have had, most recently, the March for Our Lives, the Me Too movement, and the Women's March in 2017. Now, it's not just a debate this time over the Second Amendment, it's also about the First. School districts across America have prepared for the National Day of Protest with a range of actions depending on the school district. A lot of schools worked out a method for students to hold a moment of silence or maybe express their protest message in some kind of controlled manner. But for some others, students who chose to walk out or demonstrate were reported to be punished with detention, in some cases even suspension. Jessie, some schools may argue that you've got a right to your First Amendment right after 3:45 the bell is. Until then, we're here to educate you. Do your protest on your own time.
I think this issue can be summed up pretty well from a quote by Tinker in Des Moines. It says that students and the faculty don't shed their constitutional rights of freedom of speech and expression just when you get to the school gate. I think these students are free to express their willies. They have this grievance that they have. They're afraid for their own lives. That's why it's called March for Our Lives. And I think they have every right to express their differences and their opinions.
Joe, is there a chance that
Tinker case begun in '69, but then you watch the Supreme Court back off from it. And so they end up having 4 or 5 subsequent cases. You can't tell the students they don't have First Amendment rights. All you're saying is the issue is disruption of school. Do schools have a right to do it? Even ACLU has said yes, but the schools don't seem to see it that way. Now, the issue really isn't this March. I think it's going to be more the one at the end of April. That is the anniversary of the Columbine shooting, because then you're going to have another walkout. So we'll end up seeing how the procedure is. I see the Hazelwood School District here in the St. Louis area. She wants a slip. The principal said she wants sort of something signed by parents, particularly for underage students.
Speaking of the Hazelwood School District, I mean, there was a Supreme Court case in the 80s, because I went to high school there, where the yearbook staff wanted to put something in the yearbook that the administration didn't particularly like. The students claimed that they had a First Amendment right. It went to the Supreme Court, and the school district prevailed. So I think students have a First Amendment right, but this case obviously shows that there is a limit to that when it comes to school property and school resources.
And if the standard is disruption of the school, a third, a half, or 3/4 of the students getting walking out is disruptive. I mean, you can't argue that's not disruptive. So how do we draw the line if that's the case where students have the First Amendment right completely unabetted? Then what's to stop students from having a protest pretty much every day?
Well, from my family actually works in a lot of school districts around the area, and there was some implementations of that if you wanted to protest, you had to get parental rights, and I think that is understandable for the safety of the students, but what happens when your parents don't agree with you and they don't want you to march out, but that's limiting your own freedom? And the thing is that I don't think that these students are disrupting it as much as school shootings are disrupting their learning. They're scared. Some kids don't want to go to school. Some of my friends in high school want to be homeschooled now. That's a disruption, not these students trying to stand up for what they believe in.
I think that allowing people to express their First Amendment right is obviously important. My concern really comes from the fact that I'm not exactly sure why these students feel the need to walk out or protest. I don't think there's anybody who's claiming we're okay with school shootings. We don't see that there is an issue. I think that the problem really arises with the fact that a lot of these students, they're going out, they're angry, they're protesting, and I don't think they really understand how we are going to take strides towards actually fixing the problem. And that's where I'm very concerned.
But does it matter if they understand or not, or we think they understand?
I mean, considering it's an educational institution, I really think it is important. And I really like the idea of some administrators requiring students to either write about why they decided to walk out and protest, or holding assemblies and having students come together and actually discuss these issues in a logical manner. Because, again, like I said, nobody's saying we're okay with school shootings, we don't see an issue. But what I see an issue is people are going out and they're angry and they're protesting, but it doesn't really seem to be working towards anything.
The walkout is the thing that receives the media attention, but it's not the only thing going on. So that you are having, in association with that, you've been having voter registration drives. They've been doing teach-ins, and some of the classrooms then stop at a particular time and then discuss the issue of access to guns.
And do we know what they're looking for?
What do you mean?
What exactly are they trying to accomplish
Well,
with these walkouts?
I think they've expressed that. Some degree of gun regulation. I'm not going to buy this nonsense that you sort of simply in a vague way say you have the right to keep and bear arms. You say specific weapons. And when you read the Supreme Court cases, they don't say things in some vague way that the general public wants to. You really talk about degrees of gun regulation.
Well, you're talking about interpretation. The whole Constitution the Constitution was written in the 17th century, and trying to equate it in the 21st century is going to look vague to us. So it has to go to a court for interpretation.
Let me bring this back to the protests themselves. I had the privilege of visiting with David French from National Review Institute not too long ago, and he made an interesting point at Washington University. He said part of civil disobedience is accepting the consequences for the civil disobedience. So if students get a detention or they get suspension because they broke the rules that they and the parents sign an agreement to in the handbook at the beginning of every year, they break the rules. What's wrong with some consequences? If you're not willing to face consequences, does your free speech mean anything anyway?
See, I would happily accept the consequences if I was using my right to expression and my freedom of speech about this issue. My club reached out to a bunch of high schoolers, and what they did is they had us go through their handbooks. They had us go through what they signed as a student conduct, and we found the loopholes that they could actually express themselves, because there's freedoms around a lot of these different rules, and now these schools are just trying to implement things according to the situation. I understand that situations call for some kind of guidelines and things like that, but now they're just using it as a way to
But you don't have any freedom of speech when you're under 18 and a minor living in your parents' house. If your parents don't want you walking out of class about a gun thing, you don't have any rights to say, this is my freedom right. You are a minor.
I mean,
you don't have any rights.
I hate how we're kind of framing this as people taking a stand against society. I've seen universities who've actually indicated if you receive a suspension for your actions by walking out, we won't even hold this against you. If anything, this is people just going along with the masses, and it doesn't really seem to be drumming up the conversation that I think we need to have.
Do we risk undermining parents and teachers?
Well, I think it's right to sort of raise the issue of there are consequences to your actions. And I noticed that from some of the quotes, some of the more responsible students seem to be understanding that, and there's nothing wrong. Yeah, I would be concerned as a parent if I got a kid who was 12, 13, 14, well, whatever high school age I believe morally you're looking at than middle school. But still at that age, I think that's realistic to sort of say, well, are they coming back afterwards, and who's missing? And there's a realistic level of concern.
And I want them to exercise their First Amendment rights, because they're learning a very valuable civic lessons that they're not taught in school. Is they see this horrible tragedy, what happened in Parkland, and everyone's emotions are ginned up, and everyone wants to automatically ban this gun, and they go to Ferguson, to Florida, to the state capitol, and they're expecting all of a sudden the lawmakers are going to get behind them and take away people's Second Amendment rights, and then they see that it doesn't happen that way, that there is a deliberate discussion about those things, and it doesn't just happen under emotion.
Yeah,
so it's a valuable civic lesson.
I'm going to shortchange you on time in about 10 seconds. Does it matter that it's over guns? If somebody were protesting anything else, would we be looking at the protests in the same way?
I think it wouldn't be as monopolized in the media as it is. My issue is that people are patronizing these children as they're calling up. Some of them are 18 years old. Some of them will be voting very soon, and they will move to vote people that are going to actually change things that they once seen.
All right, that's all we've got for today. On behalf of our collection of political savants and on behalf of Lindenwood University Television, thank you for watching Across the Aisle. I'm Mike Ferguson. We're going to have more to say next week.